Welcome to episode 1 of the Fire and Hammer podcast, titled Pagan Priesthood. My name is Gofi Charlie, and I will be hosting for this evening. The first topic was chosen due to its relevance to the existence of the podcast, that of the Goðar, or the Germanic Pagan Priesthood. In today's episode, I will be discussing 3 key topics of this subject. Firstly, the historical context surrounding the Goðar of 2 accounts. Secondly, the roles and responsibilities of the modern Goðar and how it reflects into our modern pagan folk. And lastly, paganism now, a brief discussion on Reconstructionism versus New Age belief and the dangers of religion that is left without leadership. I hope you enjoy our podcast. The historical Goðar. I will firstly start with the name meaning of Gofi or Goðar, for they are the same word. Gofi is the singular to Goðar the plural. The name meaning itself, Gofi, is an anglicisation of the Icelandic word Gothi, which means jarl, chieftain, or invoker. This comes from the Old Norse, Gothi, which has the same meaning, but likely is closer to its meaning to the Proto-Germanic, which is Guðjó, which is one who gods, or a Goðar. This differentiation between Icelandic and the Old Norse terms is actually linked in with Icelandic political history, which we will go over in a bit. Of the Proto-Germanic term Guðjó, it's actually an agent noun, the yol being similar to the in modern English. As an agent noun, we can see its descent through the English language. The Old English a, the Middle English and the New English Just as a fixer is someone who fixes something and an actor is someone who acts, a Goddar is someone who gods. Goðar, Goddar. In our historical context, we will cover 2 distinct societies. The first, early Anglo-Saxon England of the 7th century, and the second, medieval Iceland of the 10th to 13th centuries. While being dissimilar in their dates, they are quite similar in their societal structure. Both were strifeful times with Christian conversions on the rise. England, with its first king converting to the new faith, being Athelbert of Kent, died in 616 AD. This is only 11 years prior to the account of Coifi the Gothi in 627 AD. Iceland, meanwhile, famously converted to Christianity in 1000 AD. This was naught but 70 years after the account of the first Icelandic Olshir Gothi, Thorstein Ingolfsson. The account of Coifi the Gothi from Bede's Ecclesiastical History of the English People. Coifi the Gothi was the priest of the temple at Goodmanham and high priest of the kingdom of Northumbria. Serving under King Edwin, he was part of the Witan as the official Gothi on this council. From this we can see the role of the high priest or the high Gothi as threefold. 1, the presence on the king's Witan or council. 2, the leadership of the Goðar as a whole. And 3, the maintaining and overseeing of the rites and rituals at the temple, in this case, the temple at Goodmanham. From the account of Bede, King Edwin wanted to convert his nation to Christianity, and indeed, himself. In doing so, he called upon Coifi, the high priest, for advice on this venture. Coifi, himself seemingly likewise having a crisis of faith, denounced the old religion and its uncertainty of the soul as it proceeds into the afterlife. Coifi compared this to a bird flying out from a winter storm into a warm home, and then back out into a winter storm through 2 doors. While the soul, in this context being the bird, is known in the household and can be seen, much like in our world, before that and after it, there is no verified claim as to where the soul came from or went. Coifi, following this denouncement, picked up weapons and rode a stallion out of the king's council and to the temple at Goodmanham. From here he threw a spear into the temple and burnt its building down for all to see. From this source we can see 2 taboos listed, the first being the riding of any but a mare, in this case incorrectly listed as a stallion, and the bearing of arms. Both seem to be taboos that were quite controversial for a pagan priest to do. Further credence is given to the veracity of these taboos, as this story is likely a political propaganda piece for the conversion of the folk to Christianity. The throwing of the spear is a Germanic symbolic act of declaring war. In this sense, the high priest declaring war on his own temple is clearly for propaganda purposes. The Olshir Gothi in Iceland. The source we're using here is Gunmar Carlson's The Investigation of the Role of the Goðar. He uses several sources in his book, but we'll be using him as a singular one for ease. In the meaning of the name Allsherjargothi, it means all people's chieftain in Icelandic, although if you took it to the Old Norse derivative, it would be all people's Gothi. With the political upheaval in Iceland and its slow conversion towards Christianity, the role of the Goðar became a semi-legal one, less a priest, more of a civic blesser of the Althing, or the Icelandic Assembly. The office of the Allsherjargothi was referred to as the Goðorth, and was passed down from father to son through the descent of Ingolf Armarsson, the first settler of Iceland. Dissimilar from the old role, it concerned the blessing and the opening of the Icelandic Thing, or the Assembly. His son, Thorstein Ingolfsson, was the first Allsherjargothi recorded in 930. Of this line, the last Allsherjargothi is Árni Orefa Magnusson, the son of the previous Allsherjargothi and son-in-law to Snorri Sturluson. This role of the Goðorth ended in 1262 with the Goðar swearing fealty to the Norwegian king. Thus ended the Goðorth of the Icelandic Commonwealth. The role of the Allsherjargothi from this source shows the importance of consecration of assembly, which is likely from an older practice. Parallels can be seen of the evolution of Iceland from a local to a national institution, with the transition of local Gothi to the centralised role of the Allsherjargothi. The importance of this role is further emphasised in the fact that it survived 250 years past the official conversion of Iceland to Christianity. There are many more accounts of the Gothi, but they'll be covered in later episodes in more detail, including these two. The roles and responsibilities of the Goðar. The first and foremost role of importance to the Goðar is the holding of rituals or blots. But you may be asking, what is a blot? Here is the meaning. The meaning of blot comes from the Old English blot, which is offering or sacrifice. This is cognate to the Old Norse blot, meaning the same thing, as well as in many other Germanic languages. All of these derive from the single origin of Proto-Germanic bloda, which means offering or sacrifice. The association of this word cannot escape its meaning. It is associated with blood, as in the context of a blood sacrifice. To our forefathers, blood was life force. It was the energy that was offered to the gods freely in return for their blessing and gifts. The degrees of offering were equal to the worth of what was being sacrificed, from the smallest hair up to a group of human captives. While human sacrifice ended nearly 1500 years ago, during pagan times, animal sacrifice still continues to this day. Some groups still take the sacrificial blade to the animals, some do not. What is the purpose of blot? It is simply thus: the gift giving in exchange for blessings. In the appeasement and worship of the gods, gift giving is of the tantomost importance. This is linked into the Germanic gift giving cycle, also known as a gift for a gift. I shall quote Woden from Havamal 42. To his friend a man, a friend shall prove, and gifts with gifts require. But men shall mocking with mockery answer, and fraud with falsehood meet. The meaning of this verse is clear. All action is reciprocal. Insult shall be met with insult. Friend shall be met by friend. Insult to the gods is something you do not want to do. In expanding upon blot, the steps of sacrifice are laid out thus. I have detailed them as ninefold for ease of reading. Construction, the establishment of the sacred space. Ablution, the cleansing of the self. Meditation, moments of silence and deep internal prayer. Purification, the cleansing of the sacred space. First consecration, the blessing of the sacred space and all within. Invocation, the calling of the gods to the purified and blessed space. Second consecration, the blessing of the folk in the presence of the gods, including food and libations. Supplication, petition and prayer to the gods. Culmination, the closing of the sacred space. The presence of the Goðar is required to oversee these steps and are pivotal in its undertaking. A blot cannot be a blot without the presence of a Gothi, for their wisdom and guidance is necessary for a clean process. In this sense, they act as a religious authority within the sacred space and out, and an actor for the gods. This harkens back to the meaning of the name being a Goðar, or one who gods. Blot is the presence of the divine and man in one place together, so requires expertise in these matters to correctly guide the folk and the process through. Without the presence of a learned Gothi, the process may not be conducted correctly, or worse, the gods may be insulted. Wisdom is fundamental for the ordination of the Gothi. I shall quote High One in Havamal 6. A man shall not boast of his keenness of mind, but keep it close to his breast. To the silent and wise does ill come seldom, when he goes as guest to a house. Be it a grove, a temple, or a half-shrine, the sacred space are the places of the gods. May ill intention seldom come to you, if in the presence of a wise Gothi. The shepherding of the folk. With the aforementioned leadership of sacred rites, the Gothi is likewise needed for good advice on key topics, namely on morality, the rejection of bad habits, and virtues. From morality, they shall instruct on how to act both in yourself and to others. Through bad and good habits, it is important for them to act as an arbiter on the rejection of bad habits that are destructive or wasteful to one's life, for these are not life-affirming to paganism, and the promotion of good habits through beneficial and life-affirming acts, for these are life-affirming to paganism. Acting as an example of these virtues as a physical reference is likewise fundamental for the Gothi. The folk should know that these virtues can be upheld, and there are manifestations in our Midgard of this. This, however, has to come with severe retribution when said virtues are not upheld by the Gothar, including disrobing and penalty. Gothi are the actors of the gods, but cannot act above the gods. In the context of this advice, the folk is an adjective for the pagan community as a whole, and not for everybody. It does not pertain to all of a nation's people, only those who are within the faith. The reason for this is the gods are fickle to those who are fickle in their loyalty towards them. I shall quote the prose section of Lokasenna. And after that, Loki hid himself in Thromong's waterfall in the guise of a salmon, and there the gods took him. He was bound with the bowels of his son Vali, but his son Narfi was changed to a wolf. Skarthi took a poisoned snake and fastened it up over Loki's face, and the poison dropped thereon. Sigyn, Loki's wife, sat there and held a shell under the poison, but when the shell was full, she bore away the poison, and meanwhile the poison dropped on Loki. Thus he struggled so hard that the whole earth shook therewith, and now that is called an earthquake. It is important to be not a Loki. Loyalty to the gods is absolute. Paganism now. So what of paganism in this day and age? Quite simply, it is a revival like no other. All across the world, from Eastern to Western nations, from European to African nations, paganism is growing and going from strength to strength. The big argument of this day and age is between Reconstructionism and New Age religion, which should not even be a conversation within the pagan sphere, to be honest. The most important practice within paganism is of honouring your ancestors. This cannot be done if your religion is not based in their traditions. Reconstructionism comes with the adapting of old practices to new customs. In reference to the famous phrase from Mala, quote, "Tradition is not the preservation of ashes, but the worship of fire," end quote. In this analogy, Reconstructionist paganism is the worship of fire. New Age religion is the worship of plastic. Tradition is keyly that which keeps chaos at bay by creating a collective foundation of worship. Without this, religion becomes a free-for-all of unverifiable personal gnosis and placing oneself over the gods. Without this tradition, religion devolves into what we see in this modern age, New Age cults surrounding aliens or the worships of oneself by egomaniacs. Religion becomes victimizing and tyrannical, which is the opposite of its true path of self-actualization in service to the divine. Religion is not about yourself or the worship of yourself, it is about the worship of the gods. That is a key point. In essence, the Gothar, in this context, are the custodians of this tradition, both to enforce and protect it from vandals and self-worshippers. So what of pagan tradition? Is it not broken? Broken in practice, but not broken in its wisdom. There are many sources of spiritual energy that we can draw from in our Midgard. The Eddas can act as our scripture and song. The sagas as our heroic inspiration. Metrical charms and spells as our healing. And finally, the voice of the Gothar for our spiritual leadership. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Fire and Hammer podcast. In the closing of our first episode, I felt it beneficial to read the first verse of Völuspá and leave its meanings for you to decipher in this context. Völuspá 1. Hearing I ask from the holy races, From Heimdall's sons, both high and low, thou wilt, Volfather, that will I relate, old tales I remember of men long ago. We have also remembered, and will never forget again. How the gods.